Tonight, we begin a slow and peaceful journey through the history of one of the most remarkable cities the world has ever known. A city that has stood between Europe and Asia for thousands of years. A city surrounded by quiet seas, protected by powerful walls, and filled with palaces, churches, markets, gardens, and narrow streets. Tonight, we travel to Constantinople. You do not need to remember every name or every date. There is nothing you need to study. Simply allow the story to carry you gently into the past. Take a slow breath. Let your shoulders relax and imagine that the modern world around you is slowly disappearing. The sounds of cars and distant traffic begin to fade. Electric lights vanish from the horizon. Tall modern buildings become transparent and slowly dissolve into the darkness. In their place, an older landscape begins to appear. Before you lies a narrow stretch of blue water. This is the Bosporus, the natural channel connecting the Black Sea with the waters leading toward the Mediterranean. On one side is Europe, on the other is Asia. Small wooden boats move quietly across the water. Their sails catch the evening wind. Fishermen pull their nets from the sea, while seabirds circle slowly above them. On the European shore, a small settlement rises from a triangular piece of land. Long before it was called Constantinople, this place was known as Byzantium. The settlement occupied an extraordinary position. To the north lay the sheltered waters of the Golden Horn. To the south stretched the Sea of Marmara. To the east, the Bosporus separated Europe from Asia. Ships traveling between distant regions passed close to its shores. Merchants carrying grain, wine, olive oil, cloth, spices, timber, and precious metals moved through these waters. The small city could watch the ships that sailed between the Black Sea and the Mediterranean world. Its residents could fish in the surrounding seas. They could trade with travelers arriving from many different lands. And because water surrounded much of the settlement, the city was easier to defend than many other ancient towns. For centuries, rulers understood the importance of this location. Empires rose and fell around it. Armies crossed nearby roads. Merchants spoke many languages in its marketplaces, but the city remained relatively small compared with the great centers of the ancient world. That would begin to change during the 4th century. At that time, the Roman Empire controlled enormous territories. Its lands stretched across Europe, North Africa, and Western Asia. Governing such a vast empire was difficult. Messages took days or weeks to travel. Armies had to protect distant frontiers. Political struggles frequently divided powerful leaders. One of those leaders was Emperor Constantine. Constantine understood that the eastern regions of the Roman Empire had become increasingly important. They contained wealthy cities, productive farmland, major trade routes, and large populations. The old city of Rome remained deeply respected, but it was far from some of the empire's most important eastern frontiers. Constantine began looking toward Byzantium. The location offered many advantages. It connected continents. It stood near valuable trade routes. It possessed natural harbors. And it could be protected by walls on its landward side, while the sea guarded much of the remaining coastline. Constantine decided to transform the old settlement into a new imperial capital. Construction began on a remarkable scale. Workers arrived from different parts of the empire. Old streets were widened. New roads were planned. Palaces, baths, public squares, churches, houses, and defensive structures began to appear. Materials and works of art were brought from other ancient cities. Columns, statues, and decorations traveled across land and sea to fill the new capital. The city was designed not simply as another provincial town, but as a center worthy of a Roman emperor. In the year 330, the transformed city was formally dedicated. It became known as Constantinople, the city of Constantine. Some also called it New Rome. Yet the city would develop a character of its own. It stood at the meeting point of different worlds. Roman government mixed with Greek language and culture. Christian traditions grew beside memories of the ancient past. Travelers arrived from Europe, Asia, Africa, and the lands surrounding the Black Sea. Over time, Constantinople would become one of the largest, richest, and most influential cities of the medieval world. But for now, imagine the city during its first quiet evening as an imperial capital. The sun is beginning to set over the distant hills. The Bosporus reflects shades of gold and deep blue. Workers leave unfinished buildings and walk toward their homes. Small lamps appear in windows. The smell of smoke rises from cooking fires. Guards take their positions near the city gates. Ships settle in the calm waters of the harbor. And above the new streets of Constantinople, the first stars slowly appear. Constantine's new capital did not appear all at once. For years, the city remained a vast landscape of construction. Stonecutters shaped heavy blocks beside the roads. Carpenters prepared beams for roofs in public buildings. Carts carried marble, timber, bricks, and metal through streets that were still unfinished. Across the city, the sound of hammers echoed from morning until evening. The old settlement of Byzantium was being transformed into an imperial capital. Constantine wanted the new city to reflect the power and dignity of Rome. But Constantinople would not simply copy the old capital. It would grow according to its own landscape. The city stood on a peninsula surrounded by water on three sides. Its hills rose gently above the harbors. From the highest points, residents could look across the Bosporus toward Asia. To the north, the calm waters of the Golden Horn formed a natural harbor. Merchant ships could enter these protected waters and unload their cargo close to the city. One of the most important roads was known as the Messi. The word simply meant the middle road. It became the great ceremonial street of Constantinople. The road passed through public squares, markets, and important districts. Emperors, soldiers, officials, merchants, travelers, and ordinary residents all moved along its path. During great ceremonies, the street could be decorated with banners, flowers, lamps, and colored cloth. On quieter days, it carried the ordinary rhythm of the city. Vendors called to passing customers. Animals pulled carts over the stone surface. Workers carried baskets and tools. Messengers hurried between government buildings. Near the imperial center stood the great palace. It was not a single building, but a large collection of halls, courtyards, churches, gardens, residences, and administrative rooms. Over the centuries, different emperors would expand and alter the palace. For now, imagine its earliest courtyards. Officials walk beneath covered passages. Guards stand beside wide doorways. Fountains provide a soft and steady sound. Beyond the palace walls, the sea glimmers in the afternoon light. Close to the palace was the Hippodrome. It had existed before Constantine's time, but he enlarged and transformed it into one of the city's greatest public spaces. The Hippodrome was a long arena built for chariot racing and public ceremonies. Rows of seats rose around the racing track. On important days, tens of thousands of people could gather there. The emperor watched from a special box connected to the palace. Below him, horses and chariots raced around the central barrier. But the Hippodrome was more than a sporting arena. It was a place where the people of Constantinople could see their emperor. It was also a place where they could express excitement, loyalty, anger, or disagreement. The noise during a race could be enormous. Yet now imagine the Hippodrome late at night. The crowds have disappeared. The seats are empty. Moonlight falls across the silent track. A light wind passes between the columns and monuments. Only a few guards remain near the entrances. Throughout the new capital, Constantine placed statues and monuments brought from other parts of the empire. Some came from ancient Greek cities, others came from older Roman centers. These objects connected Constantinople to the long history of the classical world. A statue that had once stood in one city might now appear in a Constantinopolitan square. A column transported across the sea might rise beside a newly built forum. To the people walking past them, these monuments represented age, authority, beauty, and imperial power. At the center of one important public space stood the Column of Constantine. It rose above the Forum of Constantine and marked the presence of the emperor who had transformed the city. The Forum was surrounded by buildings and arcades. It served as a place for ceremony, trade, conversation, and movement. People passed through it on their way to other parts of the capital. Some paused beneath the covered walkways. Others gathered near shops or public offices. Constantinople also required practical systems. A great city needed water. It needed storage areas, public baths, bakeries, ports, roads, and markets. It needed reliable supplies of food. Grain was especially important. Ships carried grain and other goods toward the capital. Workers unloaded sacks and containers at the harbors. From there, supplies moved into warehouses and marketplaces. Bakers worked through the early hours. Before sunrise, the smell of fresh bread began to spread through nearby streets. Public baths became part of the daily life of the city. They were places for washing, resting, exercising, and conversation. Warm rooms were heated from below. Water moved through channels and pipes. Visitors entered from busy streets and stepped into spaces filled with warmth, steam, and quiet echoes. Elsewhere, houses filled the growing neighborhoods. Some were large residences belonging to wealthy families. They might contain interior courtyards, decorated rooms, servants' areas, and small gardens. Other homes were far simpler. Craftspeople, dock workers, shopkeepers, soldiers, and laborers lived in crowded districts near their work. At night, most streets became dark. Oil lamps provided small circles of light. Residents closed wooden shutters. Dogs wandered between buildings. From distant homes came the faint sounds of conversation, cooking, and children preparing for sleep. The city's Christian identity was also becoming increasingly visible. Churches appeared among older buildings and monuments. Constantine supported the growing Christian faith, while many traditions from the Roman past continued to shape public life. The city therefore contained signs of both change and continuity. Old statues stood near new churches. Roman ceremonies continued in a capital that was becoming increasingly Christian. Greek was widely spoken, while Latin remained important in imperial government. People from many regions met in the streets and harbors. By the end of Constantine's reign, the city was still developing. Construction did not stop. New residents continued to arrive. Merchants established businesses. Officials brought their households. Soldiers guarded the roads and gates. Religious communities created new places of worship. The capital was beginning to find its rhythm. At sunrise, the harbors became busy. During the day, the main streets filled with movement. In the evening, the markets slowly closed. And after darkness fell, the sound of the sea returned. Waves touched the stone walls and wooden docks. Ships rested in the Golden Horn. Lamps burned inside the palace. The hippodrome became silent. Above the rooftops, smoke rose gently into the cool night air. Constantinople was no longer simply an ancient settlement beside the Bosporus. It had become New Rome. And in the centuries ahead, emperors would continue to build, decorate, defend, and reshape it. The Hippodrome of Constantine and the historic peninsula remain central parts of Istanbul's documented heritage. While Constantinople was formally established as Constantine's capital in 330. As Constantinople grew, its streets filled with people from many different places. Some had been born within the city walls. Others had traveled from distant provinces, crossing mountains, plains, and seas before arriving at the imperial capital. Merchants came to sell their goods. Soldiers arrived to serve the emperor. Officials came to work in the government. Craftspeople brought valuable skills. Sailors entered the harbors after long journeys across the Mediterranean and the Black Sea. Every morning, the city slowly awakened. Before sunrise, bakers were already working. Inside warm workshops, dough was prepared and placed into heated ovens. The smell of bread drifted into the surrounding streets. For many residents, bread was one of the most important parts of the daily diet. Grain reached Constantinople by ship and was stored in large quantities. The movement of grain into the city required careful planning. Ships had to arrive. Cargo had to be unloaded. Warehouses had to be maintained. Bakers had to produce enough bread for a large urban population. Near the harbors, workers began their day early. Ropes tightened around wooden posts. Sails were lowered. Heavy containers were carried from ships onto the docks. Some vessels brought wine or olive oil. Others carried timber, metal, textiles, pottery, or food. Goods reached the Byzantine world by sea and land from distant regions, making trade an important part of the empire's economy. Imagine walking slowly beside the Golden Horn in the early morning. The water is calm. Small waves touch the wooden hulls of anchored ships. Sailors speak quietly as they prepare for the day. A merchant checks a list of goods. A dock worker lifts a basket onto his shoulder. Nearby, fishermen arrange the night's catch. As the sun rises higher, the main streets become busier. Shopkeepers open wooden shutters. Craftspeople place examples of their work near their entrances. Metal workers begin heating their furnaces. Potters arrange bowls, plates, and lamps. Tailors measure cloth. Carpenters shape pieces of wood. Some trades were organized in particular areas, so that one street might become known for a certain craft or product. The markets offered both ordinary necessities and valuable luxuries. Residents could find vegetables, fruit, bread, fish, meat, cheese, wine, oil, spices, and household objects. Wealthier customers might purchase fine fabrics, jewelry, perfumes, decorated objects, or imported goods. The quality and variety of a person's food depended greatly on wealth and social position. The lives of the rich and poor could be very different. A wealthy household might occupy a spacious home with decorated rooms, servants, storage areas, and an interior courtyard. Meals could include several dishes and imported ingredients. The family might own valuable clothing, furniture, books, or religious objects. A poor family might live in a small and crowded space. Its members could spend long hours working simply to afford food and shelter. Daily life across the Byzantine Empire was strongly shaped by family background, occupation, education, and wealth. Yet rich and poor residents still shared the same city. They passed one another in streets, churches, marketplaces, harbors, and public spaces. They heard the same church bells. They watched the same imperial processions. They experienced the same winter rain and summer heat. They stood beneath the same great walls. For many people, the household was the center of daily life. Family members worked together. Children learned through observation and repetition. A child born into a craft family might slowly learn the work of a parent. A merchant's child could learn numbers, weights, bargaining, and the movement of goods. Children from wealthy families had greater access to formal education. They might study reading, writing, grammar, classical literature, philosophy, law, or religious texts. Most people, however, learned the skills required for their lives through family and work. Women's daily experiences also depended strongly on social class. Women could manage households, own property, inherit wealth, work in manufacturing and retail, or operate businesses, although public and political authority remained heavily restricted. Some women worked beside relatives. Others sold food, textiles, or household goods. Wealthier women might supervise servants and manage family property. Widows could hold important responsibilities within their households. Religious life shaped the rhythm of the city. Churches stood throughout Constantinople. Some were large and richly decorated, and others served smaller neighborhoods or religious communities. Residents attended services, observed religious festivals, prayed before sacred images, and visited churches associated with saints or holy relics. Monasteries also became part of the urban landscape. Monks and nuns followed structured religious lives. Some communities offered charity, shelter, or care for people in need. On important religious days, processions could move through the city. Clergy carried crosses, candles, icons, and sacred objects. Crowds gathered along the route. Prayers and hymns echoed between the buildings. For a moment, ordinary streets became ceremonial spaces. The emperor also appeared in public ceremonies. Imperial clothing, music, guards, banners, and carefully organized movement helped communicate the authority of the ruler. Many residents might never speak directly to an emperor, yet they could see the signs of imperial power throughout the city. Coins carried the emperor's image. Government officials enforced imperial laws. Soldiers guarded gates and public buildings. Palaces and monuments reminded residents that Constantinople was the center of an empire. The city could also be noisy. Wheels struck uneven stones. Animals moved through crowded streets. Vendors called to customers. Construction continued in growing districts. Church bells and human voices mixed with sounds from workshops and harbors. But there were quieter moments. During the hottest part of a summer afternoon, some streets became less crowded. Shopkeepers rested in shaded doorways. Cats slept beside stone walls. A gentle wind moved through courtyards and gardens. Near the sea, the air carried the smell of salt and timber. Public baths offered another kind of escape from the street. Residents entered rooms of different temperatures. Water, steam, conversation, and echoes filled the interior. Bathing could be both practical and social. People washed, rested, met acquaintances, and discussed events. Fountains and water channels also served the city. Supplying water to such a large population required reservoirs, aqueducts, cisterns, pipes, and constant maintenance. Rainwater and transported water were stored for future use. Some of this water remained hidden beneath streets and buildings in enormous underground cisterns. At evening, the pace of the city slowed. Merchants counted their earnings. Craftspeople put away their tools. Workers carried baskets home. Smoke rose from kitchens. Families gathered for meals. Oil lamps were lit one by one. The brightest buildings might remain illuminated, but many residential streets became dark. Without modern streetlights, people depended on lamps, torches, moonlight, and familiarity with their surroundings. Doors were closed. Wooden shutters covered windows. The sound of the markets faded. From inside, homes came quiet conversations. Some residents prepared for sleep. Others continued working beside a small flame. A writer copied a manuscript. A servant completed a final task. A guard walked along a wall. A sailor checked the ropes of his ship. Beyond the city, the waters remained dark and open. Constantinople was an imperial capital, but it was also a collection of ordinary lives. Bakers, sailors, merchants, servants, priests, craftspeople, officials, parents, and children all moved through its streets. Most would never become famous. Their names would not appear in chronicles, yet their work kept the city alive. Each loaf of bread, repaired roof, unloaded ship, cleaned room, finished garment, and lit lamp contributed to the rhythm of Constantinople. Now imagine the city late at night. The markets are empty. The workshops are silent. Small lamps glow behind a few windows. The dark outline of the walls follows the edge of the land. Ships move gently in the harbor. And over the sleeping capital, the stars remain clear above the Bosporus. By the 6th century, Constantinople had become one of the greatest cities in the world. Its harbors were crowded with ships. Its markets were filled with goods from distant lands. Its streets carried officials, soldiers, merchants, clergy, craftspeople, servants, and travelers. At the center of this vast imperial capital stood the emperor. In the year 527, a new ruler came to the Byzantine throne. His name was Justinian. Justinian saw himself as the heir to the ancient Roman emperors. He wanted to strengthen the empire, reform its laws, recover lost territories, and surround Constantinople with buildings worthy of an imperial capital. His reign would become one of the most famous in Byzantine history. Beside Justinian stood Empress Theodora. Her early life was very different from that of most imperial women. She rose from a modest background and became one of the most influential figures at court. Theodora participated in political decisions, received foreign visitors, supported religious causes, and advised the emperor during moments of crisis. Together, Justinian and Theodora ruled from the great palace beside the Hippodrome. From this palace, orders traveled across the empire. Officials collected taxes, generals prepared military campaigns, judges interpreted laws. Builders planned churches, bridges, fortifications, and public works. One of Justinian's most important projects was the reorganization of Roman law. For centuries, Roman laws had accumulated in many different collections. Some contradicted one another. Others were difficult to locate or understand. Justinian ordered legal scholars to gather, organize, and revise these laws. The result became known as the Corpus Juris Civilis, or the body of civil law. Its influence would continue far beyond the Byzantine Empire, yet Justinian's reign was not peaceful. Constantinople was home to intense political rivalries. Many of these rivalries were connected to the chariot racing factions of the Hippodrome. The most powerful factions were known as the Blues and the Greens. Their supporters were not simply fans of racing teams. The factions could also represent social networks, political interests, neighborhood loyalties, and religious disagreements. During races, the Hippodrome became a place where thousands of people could express their feelings toward the emperor. In January of the year 532, tension in the city grew rapidly. After several faction members were arrested and sentenced, supporters of the Blues and Greens began to unite against the government. Crowds gathered in the Hippodrome. Their anger spread into the streets. They shouted a single word, Nika. It meant victory. The unrest became a rebellion. Buildings were attacked and set on fire. Smoke rose above Constantinople. Government offices, private homes, churches, and public structures were damaged or destroyed. For several days, much of the city was controlled by the rebels. Justinian considered leaving Constantinople. Ships were prepared. The emperor and his advisors discussed escape. According to later accounts, Theodora opposed the idea. She argued that abandoning the capital would bring dishonor and that imperial power should not be surrendered without resistance. Justinian remained. His generals prepared a counterattack. Imperial forces entered the Hippodrome, where a large crowd of rebels had gathered. The rebellion was crushed with enormous loss of life. The exact number of deaths cannot be established with certainty, but ancient accounts describe many thousands killed. After the revolt, much of central Constantinople lay damaged. Streets were covered with debris. Important buildings had burned. Among the structures destroyed was an earlier church dedicated to holy wisdom. Justinian decided to replace it with something far more ambitious. The new church would be called Hagia Sophia. Its name meant holy wisdom. Justinian appointed two men to lead the project. They were Anthemius of Tralles and Isidore of Miletus. They were known for their knowledge of mathematics, engineering, and architecture. Thousands of workers participated in the construction. Materials were brought from many regions. Marble arrived in different colors. Columns and decorative stone came from older buildings across the empire. Brick, metal, glass, and precious materials were gathered for the new church. Construction moved with remarkable speed. The builders created an enormous central space beneath a great dome. The dome seemed to float above the interior. Light entered through rows of windows around its base. Sunlight reflected from marble surfaces, golden mosaics, polished stone, and metal decoration. Visitors entering the building would have seen a vast space unlike almost anything else in the medieval world. The scale of the church was intended to inspire wonder. It also expressed the connection between imperial authority and Christian faith. Hagia Sophia was completed in the year 537. When Justinian entered the finished church, later tradition says that he compared his achievement with the Temple of Solomon. Whether the exact words were recorded accurately cannot be verified, but the story reflects the pride associated with the building. For centuries, Hagia Sophia became the most important church in the Byzantine Empire. Emperors were crowned there. Religious ceremonies filled its interior. Clergy carried candles, crosses, books, and sacred objects through the building. Music echoed beneath the dome. Incense rose through shafts of light. At night, lamps illuminated the marble and mosaics. The building was beautiful, but it was also difficult to maintain. Earthquakes repeatedly affected Constantinople. The first great dome partially collapsed in the year 558. It was rebuilt with a different shape and greater height. Later earthquakes caused further damage. Each generation repaired, strengthened, and altered parts of the structure. Justinian also ordered many other projects. Churches, monasteries, bridges, roads, fortifications, and water systems were repaired or constructed. The city's defenses remained especially important. Constantinople was protected by walls, towers, gates, and the surrounding sea. The most famous land defenses were the Theodosian walls, built before Justinian's reign. They consisted of multiple defensive lines. A broad moat stood before an outer wall. Behind it rose a stronger inner wall with tall towers. For centuries, these defenses protected the city from armies approaching by land. The empire beyond Constantinople, however, faced constant pressure. Justinian's generals fought campaigns in North Africa, Italy, and other former Roman territories. Some lands were recovered, but the wars were expensive. They required soldiers, ships, equipment, taxes, and supplies. At the same time, the empire suffered from natural disasters and disease. In the year 542, a devastating epidemic reached Constantinople. It became known as the Plague of Justinian. People across the city fell ill. Daily life was disrupted. Workers disappeared from markets and workshops. Families lost relatives. Government activity slowed. The number of deaths is uncertain, and ancient estimates may be exaggerated, but the epidemic clearly caused severe damage. Even the emperor became ill, though he recovered. The city survived. Ships eventually returned to the harbors. Markets reopened. Bakers heated their ovens again. Craftspeople resumed their work. Religious services continued beneath the dome of Hagia Sophia, but Constantinople had changed. The reign of Justinian had brought ambition, beauty, violence, war, legal reform, disease, and reconstruction. When Justinian died in the year 565, he left behind an empire that was impressive but heavily burdened. Some of his territorial conquests would not last. His legal work, however, would remain influential, and Hagia Sophia would continue to define the skyline of Constantinople for nearly 900 years as a Byzantine church. Now imagine the city in the quiet hours before dawn. The streets around the Hippodrome are empty. The palace gardens are still. Guards stand beneath stone arches. The Bosporus moves gently in the darkness, and above the rooftops rises the great dome of Hagia Sophia. A few lamps glow inside. Their light reflects from gold and marble. The building stands as a reminder of an emperor's ambition, a city rebuilt after rebellion, and an empire still determined to survive. As the centuries passed, Constantinople faced enemies from many directions. The city stood at the center of important trade routes, but its position also placed it close to powerful rivals. Armies approached from the Balkans. Fleets entered the waters surrounding the city. New empires rose beyond the Byzantine frontiers. Again and again, the people of Constantinople looked toward their walls and wondered whether the capital would survive. The strongest protection on land was provided by the Theodosian walls. These defenses stretched across the western side of the city, from the Sea of Marmara toward the Golden Horn. An enemy approaching by land first faced a wide moat. Beyond the moat stood an outer wall. Behind that rose a larger inner wall strengthened by towers. When properly defended, the system was extremely difficult to cross. Soldiers watched from the towers. Archers prepared their bows. Supplies were stored behind the walls. Engineers repaired damage caused by stones, fire, and siege weapons. For nearly 1,000 years, these defenses helped protect Constantinople from repeated attacks. The surviving land walls remain part of Istanbul's UNESCO-listed historic areas. The sea offered protection, but it also created danger. An enemy fleet could attempt to attack the city's harbors or cut off supplies. Across the entrance to the Golden Horn, The Byzantines could stretch a massive defensive chain. Friendly ships could pass when the chain was lowered. During a siege, it could be raised to block hostile vessels. Constantinople depended heavily on ships. Food, soldiers, messages, and commercial goods arrived by water. If an enemy controlled the sea for too long, life inside the walls became much more difficult. During the 7th century, the Byzantine Empire lost large territories. Powerful armies advanced through regions that had once supplied the capital with taxes, grain, and soldiers. Constantinople itself came under severe pressure. In the years 674 to 678, Arab forces attacked the Byzantine capital over an extended period. The Byzantines resisted. Their navy used a mysterious incendiary weapon, later known as Greek fire. It could burn on the surface of the water and was extremely dangerous to wooden ships. The precise formula has been lost. Its flames, smoke, and destructive power became part of the legend surrounding Byzantine naval warfare. Several decades later, Constantinople faced another major siege. In 717, a large attacking army approached the city by land, while a fleet attempted to control the surrounding waters. Emperor Leo III organized the defense. The walls held. The Byzantine navy fought at sea. The attackers also suffered through a harsh winter, disease, hunger, and disrupted supply routes. In 718, the siege ended. The capital had survived once again. To the residents inside the city, survival could feel miraculous. Religious processions moved through the streets. Prayers were offered before sacred images. Victories were sometimes attributed not only to soldiers and walls, but also to divine protection. The people of Constantinople believed that their city held an important place within the Christian world. Yet the greatest danger did not always come from a foreign religion or a distant empire. Sometimes the threat came from other Christians. At the beginning of the 13th century, Western European forces organized the Fourth Crusade. The original goal was not Constantinople. The Crusaders intended to campaign in the Eastern Mediterranean, but political disputes, unpaid debts, promises of support, and struggles within the Byzantine royal family changed their direction. The crusading army and a powerful Venetian fleet arrived near Constantinople. They became involved in a Byzantine succession conflict. Agreements were made. Promises were given. Money and military assistance were expected. But the situation became increasingly unstable. The people of Constantinople resented the presence of foreign troops. The Crusaders became frustrated when promised payments and supplies did not fully arrive. Relations collapsed. In April 1204, the Crusaders attacked the city. They crossed the defenses and entered Constantinople. What followed was one of the most destructive events in Byzantine history. For several days, soldiers looted the imperial capital. Palaces, churches, houses, and public buildings were entered and stripped of valuable objects. Gold, silver, religious relics, works of art, manuscripts, statues, and ceremonial objects were taken. Fires damaged large sections of the city. Residents were killed, assaulted, displaced, or robbed. Hagia Sophia itself was looted. Objects that had remained in Constantinople for centuries were carried westward. Some would later appear in churches, palaces, and public spaces far from the Byzantine capital. The sack of April 1204 marked the culmination of the Fourth Crusade and caused immense damage to Constantinople. After the conquest, the Crusaders created a new state known as the Latin Empire of Constantinople. A Western ruler occupied the imperial throne. Byzantine territories were divided among Crusader leaders and Venice. But Byzantine political life did not disappear. Greek-speaking successor states formed in other regions. The most important included the Empire of Nicaea, the Despotate of Epirus, and the Empire of Trebizond. These states competed to preserve and restore Byzantine authority. Constantinople remained under Latin control for more than 50 years. During this period, the city's population and wealth declined. Many buildings were neglected. Parts of the palace complex deteriorated. Commercial power increasingly moved toward foreign merchant communities. The city that had once dominated a vast empire became the struggling capital of a smaller and less stable state. In 1261, forces loyal to the Empire of Nicaea recovered Constantinople. The city returned to Byzantine rule under Emperor Michael VIII Palaiologos. The restoration was celebrated. Religious ceremonies marked the return of an Orthodox emperor. But the old strength of the empire could not simply be rebuilt. The treasury was limited. The population had fallen. Many districts were damaged or thinly inhabited. Foreign powers controlled important trade networks. The restored Byzantine Empire possessed far less territory than it had in earlier centuries. Still, life continued. Churches were repaired. Artists created new mosaics and paintings. Scholars studied ancient Greek texts. Monasteries preserved manuscripts. Merchants worked in the harbors. Families occupied neighborhoods that had survived war, fire, and political change. The later Byzantine period produced important achievements in art, theology, and scholarship, even as the empire's political power weakened. Beyond the city, new rivals appeared. Serbian and Bulgarian rulers expanded their influence in the Balkans. Italian maritime republics competed for trade. Civil wars divided Byzantine leaders. Different emperors and claimants asked foreign powers for assistance. Each internal struggle consumed money, soldiers, and territory. In Anatolia, Turkish principalities grew as Byzantine control declined. Among them was a small state ruled by the Ottoman dynasty. Over time, the Ottomans expanded across northwestern Anatolia. They captured towns, roads, and fortresses. Then they crossed into southeastern Europe. By the late 14th century, Ottoman territory surrounded Constantinople on much of its landward side. The Byzantine capital remained impressive behind its walls, but the empire it governed had become extremely small. At times, little remained beyond the city itself and a few scattered territories. The contrast was striking. Hagia Sophia still rose above the skyline. Imperial ceremonies continued. Officials still used ancient titles. The emperor still regarded himself as the ruler of the Romans. Yet beyond the walls, Ottoman power was steadily increasing. In 1394, Sultan Bayezid I began a prolonged blockade of Constantinople. The city suffered from shortages and uncertainty. The Ottomans constructed a fortress on the Asian side of the Bosporus to strengthen their control over the waterway. But events elsewhere interrupted the pressure. In 1402, Bayezid was defeated by the Central Asian ruler Timur at the Battle of Ankara. The Ottoman state entered a period of internal struggle. Constantinople received temporary relief. It was not permanent. The Ottomans eventually reunited and resumed their expansion. Byzantine emperors searched for help in Western Europe. They offered political agreements and discussed the reunion of the Orthodox and Catholic churches. Some Western soldiers and financial assistance arrived, but there was no rescue large enough to restore the Byzantine Empire. Religious division also made cooperation difficult. Many residents of Constantinople deeply distrusted the Western powers that had attacked and occupied their city in 1204. Memories of the Fourth Crusade remained powerful. By the middle of the 15th century, Constantinople was no longer the crowded metropolis of Justinian's age. Large areas within the walls contained gardens, fields, monasteries, ruins, and small communities separated by open land. The population was much lower than it had been during the city's greatest centuries. But the capital was still alive. Ships continued to arrive. Church services continued. Children played in narrow streets. Craftspeople worked near the markets. Monks prayed in ancient monasteries. Guards watched from towers built by emperors who had died many centuries before. At night, the city could still appear magnificent. Moonlight touched the dome of Hagia Sophia. The walls formed a dark line across the western horizon. Small lamps glowed in houses and churches. The Bosporus moved quietly beside the old capital. But beyond the walls, a young Ottoman sultan was preparing for a final siege. His name was Mehmed II. He was determined to capture Constantinople and make the ancient imperial city the center of his own expanding empire. By the spring of 1453, Constantinople had survived for more than 11 centuries as an imperial capital. Its territory had become small. Its population had fallen. Many districts inside the ancient walls now contain gardens, monasteries, ruined buildings, and open ground. Yet the city still carried the memory of Rome. Hagia Sophia remained at its center. The imperial palace still represented an ancient line of emperors. The walls still stood between Constantinople and the armies beyond them. On the Byzantine throne sat Constantine XI Palaiologos. He would become the final emperor of the Eastern Roman Empire. Beyond the city, the Ottoman state was ruled by Sultan Mehmed II. Mehmed was young, ambitious, and determined to capture Constantinople. The city stood between the European and Asian territories of his growing empire. Its conquest would remove a powerful symbol of resistance and give the Ottomans control of one of the most important cities in the region. Mehmed prepared carefully. In 1452, he ordered the construction of a powerful fortress on the European shore of the Bosporus. It became known as Rumeli Hisar. Another Ottoman fortress already stood across the water on the Asian shore. Together, the fortresses allowed Mehmed to place greater pressure on ships passing through the Bosporus. The new fortress was completed rapidly. Its towers rose above the narrow waterway. Soldiers and cannon watched passing vessels. Constantinople was becoming increasingly isolated. Mehmed also gathered an enormous siege army. Soldiers arrived from across the Ottoman territories. Engineers prepared roads, bridges, trenches, and siege equipment. Ships assembled near the Bosporus. Supplies were collected for a campaign expected to last many weeks. Among Mehmed's most important weapons were large cannon. Gunpowder artillery had already been used in earlier warfare, but the Ottoman army prepared guns of exceptional size for the siege. One enormous cannon required teams of animals and men to move it toward Constantinople. Its transportation was slow. Roads had to be strengthened. Bridges had to be prepared. When the weapon finally reached the city, it was positioned before the western land walls. Inside Constantinople, Emperor Constantine understood the danger. He requested assistance from Western Christian powers. Some help arrived, but not enough to match the Ottoman army. A group of experienced soldiers came from Genoa under the command of Giovanni Justiniani. Venetians, Genoese, Greeks, and other defenders joined the final defense. The available soldiers were spread across miles of walls. Constantine and his commanders concentrated their strongest forces near the section expected to face the main Ottoman attack. The defenders repaired damaged walls. They stored stones, weapons, food, and water. They closed gates and prepared defensive positions. Across the entrance to the Golden Horn, they raised the Great Chain. The chain prevented the Ottoman fleet from sailing directly into the protected harbor. Behind it, Byzantine and Allied ships guarded the water. Families living near vulnerable areas moved to safer districts. Religious services continued. Prayers were offered in churches and monasteries. Residents waited as the Ottoman army approached. In early April, tents began to cover the land beyond the walls. Banners moved in the wind. Cannon were placed into position. Thousands of soldiers prepared for battle. The siege formally began on the 6th of April, 1453. Soon the large Ottoman guns began firing. The sound traveled across the city. Heavy stone projectiles struck the ancient walls. Dust and fragments fell into the defensive areas. The great cannon could cause serious damage, but it was slow to reload. Between attacks, the defenders worked through the day and night. They filled openings with timber, earth, stones, and other materials. A wall damaged during the afternoon might be repaired before the next morning. The Ottoman army launched assaults against different sections of the defenses. Archers and gunfire covered advancing soldiers. Men attempted to reach the walls with ladders. Others worked in trenches near the defensive lines. The defenders pushed ladders away, threw stones, fired arrows, and fought from the towers. Again and again, the walls held. At sea, the Ottoman fleet attempted to isolate the city, but the chain continued to block entry into the Golden Horn. A dramatic naval battle took place when several supply ships approached Constantinople. Ottoman vessels surrounded them. Fighting continued as wind and current pushed the ships close together. From the walls, the people of Constantinople watched the struggle. Eventually, the supply ships reached the safety of the Golden Horn. Their arrival raised the spirits of the defenders. For Mehmed, the event was a serious frustration. The Sultan needed another way to place ships inside the harbor. He ordered part of his fleet to be moved across the land behind the Genoese settlement of Galata. A route was prepared over the hills. Wooden tracks were laid and made easier for vessels to cross. During the night, Ottoman ships were pulled from the Bosporus, moved overland, and lowered into the Golden Horn beyond the defensive chain. When morning arrived, the defenders looked toward the harbor and saw Ottoman ships inside it. The appearance of the fleet changed the siege. The Byzantines now had to defend additional sections of the city's walls. The Ottoman ships did not immediately capture the harbor, but their presence increased the pressure on Constantinople. Mehmed's forces also attempted to dig tunnels beneath the walls. The defenders listened for movement underground. Specialists worked to locate the tunnels. When one was discovered, the defenders could break into it, flood it, fill it with smoke, or attack the men working below. These underground struggles were fought in darkness beneath the battlefield. Days became weeks. Cannon fire continued. The defenders repaired the same damaged sections repeatedly. Food and energy became limited. Men slept near their positions. The injured were carried away from the walls. Church bells, prayers, explosions, and the sounds of construction filled the city. Mehmed offered terms of surrender. The city could be spared if it submitted. Constantine refused to surrender Constantinople. The emperor remained with the defenders. By late May, the Ottoman army had created serious damage near the central section of the land walls. Mehmed began preparing for a final general assault. Inside the city, the defenders understood what was coming. On the evening of May 28th, religious ceremonies were held. People from different Christian traditions gathered in Hagia Sophia. Prayers and hymns filled the great building. Some residents sought forgiveness. Others said farewell to friends and relatives. Soldiers returned to the walls. Constantine met his commanders and encouraged the defenders. The city then entered its final night as the capital of the Byzantine Empire. Beyond the walls, the Ottoman camp was active. Weapons were prepared. Orders moved between commanders. Soldiers waited for the signal to advance. Before dawn on May 29th, the final attack began. The first waves pressed toward the walls in darkness. The defenders fought from damaged towers and temporary barriers. After the first attackers withdrew, new Ottoman units advanced. The fighting continued for hours. Cannon fire, arrows, shouting, bells, and drums created a constant roar. The strongest Ottoman troops were held back until the defenders had become exhausted. Then the elite janissaries moved forward. Near the main area of attack, Giovanni Justiniani was seriously wounded. His removal weakened the defense and damaged morale. The Ottoman forces continued to press against the broken and weakened positions. Eventually, attackers entered the city. Ottoman banners appeared above sections of the walls. The defenders began to lose control of the gates and passages. News spread that the defenses had been breached. Emperor Constantine remained near the fighting. The exact details of his final moments are uncertain. No completely reliable account records precisely how he died. Later traditions describe him removing signs of imperial rank and joining the final struggle. What is accepted is that he did not escape the city. Constantine XI died during the fall of Constantinople. As Ottoman soldiers entered through the defenses, organized resistance collapsed. Residents fled from the walls. Some moved toward their homes. Others gathered inside churches. Many entered Hagia Sophia, hoping for protection. The ancient capital had fallen. After a siege lasting nearly 2 months, Mehmed entered Constantinople. He was 21 years old. The conquest ended the Byzantine Empire and brought the city under Ottoman rule, an imperial tradition that had continued in the Eastern Mediterranean since the age of ancient Rome had reached its final day. Yet the city itself did not disappear. Its walls, churches, streets, harbors, and neighborhoods remained. New people would arrive. Damaged districts would be rebuilt. Hagia Sophia would begin a new chapter of its long history. Constantinople would become a capital once again, now at the center of the Ottoman Empire. But that is another story. For now, imagine the evening of May 29th, 1453. Smoke hangs above the damaged walls. The weapons have slowly become silent. The waters of the Bosporus reflect the fading light. Ships rest inside the Golden Horn. The great dome of Hagia Sophia remains visible above the rooftops. For generations, the people of Constantinople had believed that their city would always survive. It had resisted armies, disease, rebellion, fire, and time. But on this day, one age ended and another began. The empire was gone. The city remained. And as darkness settled across the Bosporus, Constantinople quietly entered a new chapter of its history.